All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the incredibly dense, highly debated academic perspectives packed into the book on Palestine. If you're gearing up for your CSS and PMS exams, especially for Pakistan affairs, international relations, or the essay papers, getting a solid grip on the nuances of this text is an absolute game changer. We're going to strictly analyze the source material provided by instructor Tosif Iqbal Khan and unpack the distinct theoretical frameworks of two major scholars so you can confidently weave them right into your exam answers. Here's our quick roadmap for today. 1. Meet the authors. 2. Colonialism and apartheid. 3. The U.S. veto power. 4. Comparing proposed solutions. And finally, 5. Relevance for Pakistan. Okay, Section 1. Let's meet the authors. Ilan Pappé and Noam Chomsky. We're looking at two completely different academic heavyweights here. Ilan Pappé approaches this whole issue as a UK-based new historian, meaning he's part of a group of scholars who actively re-examine early historical narratives and archival evidence. Noam Chomsky, on the other hand, analyzes the geopolitical situation through the lens of a renowned MIT linguist and political activist. They're looking at the exact same geopolitical issue, but they are using entirely different academic tools to do it. So, what happens when they look at the same situation? Well, both deliver incredibly firm critiques, but they anchor their arguments in very different vantage points. Pappé takes this historical, comparative stance, arguing that Zionism is actually more dangerous than Islamic militancy. Chomsky frames his critique heavily around moral and political philosophy, categorizing the state's policies outright as morally repugnant. Being able to distinguish between Pappé's historical approach and Chomsky's moral political approach in your writing shows a really sophisticated understanding of the source material. Moving on to Section 2, Colonialism and Apartheid, the Academic Debate. Let's start with Pappé's take on settler colonialism. He compares the state's foundation directly to the historical models we've seen in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. According to Pappé, the overarching goal of this specific model is for settlers to literally recreate themselves as a native population. And based on that historical framework, Pappé actually categorizes the resulting policies as actively pursuing genocide. Now, here's where things get really interesting, and where they totally diverge: the apartheid label. Pappé pushes the comparison even further, stating the situation is far worse than South African apartheid. But Chomsky? He strongly disagrees. He argues that the apartheid analogy is actually misguided. You see, Chomsky points out that South Africa relied heavily on the labor of the subjugated population. Here, he argues, the state is practicing an entirely different separationist model. Chomsky really hits the nail on the head regarding this separationist view with his stark assessment of the policy's ultimate goal. He says, they don't want to have anything to do with them. If they leave, that's fine. If they die, that's fine. That perfectly encapsulates Chomsky's argument, right? It's all about separation and a total cold indifference to the population's survival, rather than labor exploitation. Let's hit Section 3, the U.S. veto power, focusing on Chomsky's critique. If you're writing a paper on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, you absolutely need to use this argument. Chomsky identifies the U.S. veto power at the UN as a primary hurdle to peace. He argues this isn't just some standard procedural diplomatic tool, it's a dynamic of active complicity. By consistently shielding the state from UN resolutions, Chomsky asserts that the United States operates with this cold indifference that directly enables the continuation of the very policies we were just talking about. And this quote brilliantly illustrates his point. Chomsky points out that a U.S. veto typically functions as a double veto. So what does he actually mean by that? Well, he means the resolution is obviously not implemented, but more insidiously, the event is vetoed from history. When the U.S. blocked a major resolution back in 1976, it didn't just stop a policy. It effectively erased that potential turning point from the mainstream historical record. Dropping the double veto concept in your exam is a surefire way to demonstrate a really deep, critical reading of Chomsky's geopolitical analysis. On to Section 4, Comparing Proposed Solutions. Because their academic diagnoses are so completely different, their solutions diverge wildly too. Chomsky operates as a pragmatist here. He advocates for the international consensus of a two-state solution. Conversely, Pappé pushes for a one-democratic state solution. Why? Well, because Pappé views the foundation through the lens of South African settler colonialism, it logically follows that his solution mirrors post-apartheid South Africa, a single state with equal democratic rights for everyone. Pappé also digs into the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. While he notes it's heavily inspired by South African resistance, he offers a pretty critical warning.
He states that right now, BDS is an impulse, not a strategy. For it to actually evolve into a successful strategy, Pape argues it has to comprehensively cover all areas, including Haifa, Naqab, and Acre, not just Gaza and the West Bank.
Finally, Section 5. This is the most crucial part for you, the relevance for Pakistan and your CSS/PMS exam strategy. Instructor Tausif Iqbal Khan gave us this brilliant strategic blueprint. If you're sitting for the Pakistan Affairs paper, frame Palestine as a core issue for the Muslim world and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, highlighting Pakistan's diplomatic support. And here you can broadly cite both authors. For international relations, particularly on U.S. foreign policy, you want to quote Chomsky to bring in that UN veto angle. And finally, if you're tackling the Palestine question in your essay paper, rely heavily on Pape to provide that deep historical and colonial perspective. Let's quickly recap. Here are your 5 core takeaways to lock down. 1. Pape's settler colonialism model comparing the state to Australia and New Zealand. 2. The apartheid debate. Pape calling it worse, Chomsky calling it separationist. 3. The solution divide. Pape's one state versus Chomsky's two state. 4. Chomsky's devastating critique of U.S. veto power, complicity, and the double veto. And 5. Pape's view that BDS needs to shift from an impulse to a comprehensive strategic tool. Memorize these 5 points for your 20-mark subjective questions and your objective MCQs, and you'll be golden. As you finalize your notes today, I want to leave you with a real puzzle to ponder. How will you synthesize these 2 very distinct academic perspectives, the historical versus the political, in your next 20-mark CSS essay to formulate a truly balanced, critical argument? Think on that. A huge thank you to instructor Tausif Iqbal Khan for this incredible breakdown. His contact info is right there if you want the full notes, précis, and outline. And finally, to make sure you never miss out on vital exam strategies and to continue your